Hey all, it's Tommy here from AI in Games, and we're back taking a look at the work happening at AI company Inworld. In a recent sponsored video here on the channel, I detailed my time taking a look at Origins, the detective game created by Inworld and built in Unreal Engine that acts as a tech demo of their conversational AI systems. Origins is arguably one of the first fully playable games that exploits the recent improvements in the likes of large language models and voice pipelines for recognizing and generating speech. While it's but a demo, it does highlight the potential this technology has in the future. If you want to find out more on my thoughts on Origins, then go check out that video. But today we're digging a little deeper into how it all works. I've recently had the pleasure of sitting down with Kylan Gibbs, one of the co-founders of Inworld and their CPO or Chief Product Officer. And so for this sponsored episode, I'm going to give you the highlights of our conversation and find out more, not just about how Origins works under the hood, but what else we can expect to see from Inworld in the future. So first of all, Kylan, thank you very much for joining us on AI in Games. I wanted to talk really about digging into the Origins demo and the work that Inworld's doing in much more detail. I guess for yourselves, having had Origins roll out earlier in the year over the summer, how's the response been to that so far, and how have you found it over at Inworld?
Yeah, so Origins have been a super interesting project because we started the company in like Q3 2021. And around that time, like our first demos that we did actually were like these VR demos where I was spending 4 hours a night, putting on this headset, interacting with these characters, and I can tell you they were not very good. So Origins became sort of this internal test bed that we had to try and actually make this into a game, because the problem is, especially before ChatGPT, is people didn't even really think that this was possible. And so over the last year and a half or so, we developed it as a way to sort of demonstrate a lot of the features that we have, to sort of actually inspire a lot of the features that we were to develop, and kind of doing that firsthand taught us a lot. Frankly, we finished Origins almost a year ago now, and it just took us we were kind of pondering a while whether we should release it, because it is really just a technical demo. It's not a full game, and gamers and game developers have high standards. However, on the release, it's been fantastic. So one of the first things that we had is at GDC, we started demoing it, and Dean Takahashi, who you may know, from GamesBeat, tried it, and he said, "This is one of the best things I've seen at GDC." We're like, okay, this seems pretty good. This is a great reaction, and so we decided to sort of prepare it for public launch, and we launched it, and it's been really hilarious, to be honest. Is I guess like my main reaction to like how people have interacted with it. The actual response has been twofold, I guess. One, to the actual reality of, oh wow, this is possible. And if this is like an early tech demo, I can imagine what games will look like in the future. And that's been really cool. Some of the best comments we've seen across forums and YouTube videos have really been around this idea, like, this is what I've been waiting for in games. The other side, I think, has also been, as we've seen with, just the streamer generation, the amount of people playing Roblox or Minecraft, people want to take part as well in that creation. And so it's created also this whole new wave of streamers, people who, that are obviously people that play games, and game streaming is a huge thing. But now that streamer is actually taking part in creating the content itself by interacting with the characters and getting those responses. And so that's created like a huge amount of fun and buzz, because now each streamer can go through and have their completely different experience. And if they want, they can really try and muck around and see what happens. And that, for me, is one of the main reasons I'm excited about what we're building, which is moving away from this kind of highly produced pieces of media that are then consumed to actually media that is co-created with the people who are playing them. Lots of like the little negatives that we see are around the fact that, yes, this is not a AAA game. It's not fully produced. It doesn't have like 40 hours of gameplay. And so I think, the next step for us is, of course, through us and our partners, building both first party and third party games that actually take this to the next level.
And so, having discussed the response to Origins, I wanted to know a little more about how it all actually works. The Inworld tools have been evolving at a fair pace since the demo started development, and as stated, it's been finished for some time now, so getting a grasp of which features were utilised and which version of them that was adopted was something I was keen to find out. So I started out specifically in the world knowledge and embedding systems. As discussed in my first video, Origins runs a character engine that allows designers to craft information about a specific character, their personality, backstory, manner of their language, and much more. Now, these characters are derived from the use of large language models, popularized by the likes of ChatGPT. The text provided by the designer in the character engine editor creates embeddings that provide a supporting scaffolding of information that the language model will then use at a later time. In the context of Origins, that means things like character names, their personality, but also their motivations and goals they seek to achieve as part of the established fiction. But how this all works, and the underlying infrastructure, is becoming increasingly more complex than running a single language model.
The reality is, I think, at where we've landed is like, you can't do this with a single LLM. So, we have like, I think 35 models that are all running in parallel now, just to have a single sort of, human-like interaction. And that's the character engine. And then we have the contextual mesh, which is on top of that. And the idea behind that is, as a creator, you have this idea of a story world. So, you have locations, you have certain scenes that you're within. You also have specific sort of reactions to how a player interacts. And then you, as a developer, kind of set up that mesh, which is really a set of scenes, contextual knowledge, pieces of information that are all triggered depending on how the player interacts. Yeah. And then depending on how the player is moving through that graph, each of those characters get specific sort of prompts and information. And those are coming from, the LLMs, but mainly actually there's a kind of a knowledge system that's on top of it, which is kind of controlling those facts. And then on top of that, we have what we call like a long-term memory system, which is then taking each character's experience or interactions with you, kind of like summarizing or synthesizing those into kind of, you can think about that as like the reflections that a human would have on their day-to-day experience, and storing those for long terms. And so we have this whole goals and action system now, which we're kind of, rebranding into like a logic engine, which actually allows you to control the specific contextualized responses that a character would have in any scenario. And that means that within that entire game design, we want to give the game designer the faith that what they have instilled in the world will be played, while giving the players that sort of leniency that they want to be able to play it in the way that they sort of feel is most appropriate.
I guess that ties a little bit into Origins, because I was curious with how much of the goal system was being used to ensure it's like Origins itself in that context is quite interesting, because the goals are often that certain pieces of information are going to be communicated to the player such that they can start putting together the mystery. Like, how was it kind of utilized within the context of the demo?
Yeah, actually, I mean, I'll open up the black box a bit. So like the Origin's actually using our older goals and action system, which is much more trigger based. So basically what that means is you go into the scene and Janice, the character who sort of first introduces, the setting to you is prompted to give you this background information about your role, about the world. And then as you progress, then you have to go and talk to different robots and characters to kind of uncover parts of it. And depending on which ones you've spoke to before, what you've spoken about, they'll be triggered to give you new information. We're actually doing sort of like an overhaul of it as well with this new system, which will mean you can kind of interact with any character in any order, but depending on sort of which one you have, they'll kind of nudge you in the right direction. And then when you get to sort of Maya, who's kind of one of the, the final character, who's sort of this, anyway, I won't spoil it for the folks that play it, but the character has all the information that you've actually, of all the decisions that you've made, and will respond according to that. And so this is kind of what we're trying to do over time is use this system to increasingly allow that control of how the characters respond in each context, while giving the player increasing agency in like that path that they go through.
This proposed update to the goal system sounds like it addresses an issue I found in Origins, that you'd perhaps yo-yo between characters to try and figure out what was the piece of information you were missing, and how do you churn it out of them. But on top of this, there's the individual characters and their motivations. Inworld's tools state that we can express a personality for a character and even give them some motivation. So I was curious how all of that intersects with the character engine and narrative mesh that is generated for a given storyline. Like, how does that then feed into that dialogue generation on top of that? So you've got this narrative mesh which is dictating where you're going in the game, and it's trying to nudge you in the right direction, but then also it's got to align with the character's motivations as well. And how does that then result in the output being like reconfigured to suit, I guess?
So you can kind of think about each character's kind of preset, what we call brain. And so that brain is effectively the thing that decides how to respond to each of those moments. And it's very similar to how, we operate as people, right? You probably have friends where, like, if you had a leaky pipe, like, that is the last person I'm going to, come and ask me to help me. Another one may be the perfect person. And so that we really do sort of use that brain as the way to maintain the coherence of the character while allowing anyone to really interact with any scenario. It also puts limits on sort of knowledge. So, and that basically means, so you can kind of think about the general process of, inputs being things from the world, being things from the user that are being said, being things from other characters that go into the character, that brain sort of filters and also responds to. So in terms of how it responds emotionally, how it responds in terms of the relationship changes. And then all of that gets fed to like a series of large language models, both for verbal and nonverbal behavior, which then finally output basically what is said and what is enacted. And that gets sent back to the game engine. And then that kind of comes back to you and you get the responses as a result.
And so this infrastructure, as Kylan described, was built to support this idea that players interact with the system and get an appropriate response based on the character. But an issue that sat in the back of my mind while playing Origins was while these characters embraced their position within the fiction, I wondered whether my role was being recognized on their end. And funnily enough, one of the things I found really challenging was actually getting a character to shut up. It's interesting seeing that from the perspective of a player because, like I say, I am in charge. They should be subservient to me in the context of the fiction. If I tell them to shut up, they should shut up. Both because I'm the player, but also I'm the detective trying to figure out who just committed murder. And I guess, like, what's the approach to trying to tackle that sort of thing down the line?
Yeah, so we have like a basic concept of what we call player profiles, which is kind of the information of who you are as almost think about it yourself as a character interacting with the other characters. In the context of Origins, you have a pre-coded role, which is as a detective, and they'll respond to you in that way. In terms of then like those kind of, I guess, those sub roles of, okay, now I want to, for example, be the kind detective, and I want you to, just be quiet and just let me do my thing. I think it's actually one of the things that Origins has helped us learn a lot is, players want to play through every different way. And in some cases, I want to say, please don't talk to me. I just want to kind of talk at you for a while, take in this information, and then we'll come back and chat later. It's not a scenario that necessarily is designed for. It's completely possible within the, the context of the game design. Yeah. But there, I think that's kind of the edge cases that we've found. And so what it's also taught us is to kind of find these common other archetypes of players coming in. And so we're working with, a lot of our major enterprise partners as well, kind of identify those edge cases. And so we can say, okay, if this person really wants to try and get the latest news from this character, but you're in a Lord of the Rings world, probably not the right response. How does the character, gracefully bring you back to the world? In your case, if you're trying to get the characters to be quiet and you just want to go around and look at the world, also we need to kind of design for that scenario. And that's, I think, something that is designed into the game is not just sort of what the characters are, but also learning how to respond to each different scenario that a player or player archetype that the player wants to kind of undertake.
Perhaps for me, what is going to be a big test for the likes of Inworld is scaling up these systems to handle not just more complex interactions, but also creating these NPCs at scale. In Origins, these conversational AIs only chat with the player and not other characters. Has there any thought or even been experimentation running yet within Inworld on trying to have characters talk to characters? Because even just the idea of having two conversational bots converse with one another is also a useful mechanism to communicate information to players.
Yeah, that's actually one of our biggest pushes right now. We do have internal demos that are working. So we call this like a multi-participant system. So you can think about a few different scenarios. So one is, player comes up, you have 2 or 3 characters in a conversation, and let's say you're in Assassin's Creed style scenario, you need to listen over to their conversation to understand, to pick up in information. Really cool mechanism. And then you also imagine, okay, then the player enters into that conversation. How do you sort of orchestrate that, that 4-way conversation then? So that's actually a huge push, because I think it unlocks a lot of really important mechanisms within games, and will be kind of one of the primary things. With one thing that we see as a very common pattern is that one of the main things that this introduces into games is relationship as a mechanism. We're really excited, I think, about the possibility of like character interactions. And frankly, it's hilarious. We're going to have some kind of really new launches coming in the next month or two. And we're really thinking, though, that like, humor is the key thing there. So there's a lot of really hilarious scenarios where you as the user could also come into a conversation between 2 characters, kind of prompt them with a topic and see how they continue to have that conversation. And we've been having a lot of fun there, and hopefully that will be live in the next month or so. and kind of unlock a lot of different scenarios for gamers.
Meanwhile, if you've played Origins, you'll notice that the demo really distinguishes between the primary characters, which clearly have had a lot of time and effort put into them given their rich backstories and ideologies. But then how does Inworld plan to scale that up so that all the other NPCs you see wandering around are sufficiently interesting to engage with as well? They could conduct some very high-level conversations with you, but I noticed, sort of digging into them, that their knowledge base and what have you isn't as clearly defined as the main characters, because that's the point of the demo. We're playing with these main characters. What's the approach going for these kind of fodder-like NPCs? Like, is there a way to like template up? Sort of, here's a standard template for one of these characters with a key piece of information and maybe some parameterized things like their name or their job or something like that, such that it's almost like a procedurally generated basic character that you can still interact with.
Yeah, so the way that we're approaching this is like we're calling it character templates. And, you know, the basic idea here is you imagine you had a huge RPG world. You know, you had, let's say, 100 different towns. Each town you wanted to have like, 3 barkeeps, 10 blacksmiths, 5 knights, whatever it was, right? And you wanted them each to have slightly different, relationships, but you also want them to all be aware of all the other ones and within the same world. And so, yeah, you basically can build a character template. And then what we have as a way to sort of contextualize them is we have a concept of like common knowledge, which is, okay, what is the location that I'm in? What is the general rules of the world that I'm in? Who are the other characters within that world? And then, for example, for different groups, like let's say you talk to an orc versus a fairy versus an elf, they may all then have like a different set of information about the specific species that they're a part of. And so all of those are different parts of information that are then fed to the character. And then for each of those, we can actually auto-generate character descriptions as well. A specific character, persona based on that, and then you can go in. And so we're working on a way to basically say, okay, I want to instantiate this world with 100 characters with these different parameters, snap of a finger, or roughly snap of a finger. They're all there and they're all alive. And so I think that is definitely something. And I think that the way that it's going and the way that gaming in general is going towards these more open world games, I think that will be really important.
Now, while I was largely on my best behavior when I played the demo, the elephant in the room during any of these playtests is the notion of safety. How do you approach quality assurance for a game in which you do not have 100% control of what an AI is going to say? But that's just the beginning of an even bigger creative challenge, in that while we need to ensure safety, it shouldn't inherently limit the type of language being used by these characters such that more evil characters feel less threatening. Fortunately, Inworld have baked this into much of their product offerings. And so, like, how do you balance that in terms of design for the creator and then also for Inworld as a whole, I guess, because you also have a reputation to maintain and you don't want to end up with, all it takes is for one clip on TikTok and already, you've got a headache on your hands.
So we have sort of a very strong base safety system that sort of is a variety of things, or you can think about it as more just like a generic filter system. And that controls, first of all, what the player is actually able to take in, like, or respond with. So if you say something really incendiary, hateful, the character will still in their sort of character be like, oh, this is actually not something I really want to talk about. What about this? And the way that system is built is as it comes in, we actually filter, okay, did the player say something that is particularly inappropriate? If not, okay, let's let it go to the model. Let's see what the character says. Does the character say something that is particularly bad in response? If so, we'll kind of regenerate with an intentional approach. And then you couldn't get your response out. And there's actually a series of almost 6 layers of safety within that. So that, we need to be able to design our system so that if we're making My Little Pony experience, that needs to be appropriate for, age 8 children, right? If you're building an experience for GTA, on the other hand, the creator would be very upset if you had My Little Pony level safety. You need to be able to open that up a bit. And then on top of that, there's things like the kind of fourth wall system, which allows you to kind of contain things within the specific game world. There's other things that we can do, for example, around like biasing towards certain topics, biasing character responses depending on scenario, that allow you to kind of control for those different settings. Our kind of thought is like, we don't want to be specific, too opinionated as to like what creators build, but there are of course certain sort of limits that we place on that, just due to ethical boundaries and the fact that like we don't necessarily think that characters being able to say anything hateful, is a limit. Now there's of course challenges, because if you're playing a medieval world or some medieval fantasy world and there's orcs in there, everybody may hate orcs, and that's actually kind of then you get into some challenging questions. Okay, is that generally saying hate towards specific groups?
Yeah.
And we do, though, then at that point kind of offload that responsibility onto the creator, who then decides whether or not that's an appropriate thing to include in that world. And we do monitor logs. So there have been points where we had to reach out to creators and talk to them and say, hey, just by the way, we'd ask you to change these parts of the character. We are finding that it's kind of violating our terms and conditions.
Does that then create a problem on the other end when you're generating the text through the language model? Not in the sense that I want it to create incendiary language, but kind of alluding to your orc analogy or example, that you want evil characters to sound evil or angry characters to sound angry. And so there's a kind of an invisible line you trip over in all of those circumstances where, okay, this might actually prove too incendiary and now we have to block it. But if that line is too early or too close, then it results in characters being kind of milquetoast, I guess, that you end up with an evil character who's more vaudeville kind of rather than actually kind of contemporary evil, nasty, I guess.
That's exactly right. So to be honest, even things like swearing, there's characters, for example, in video games who need to swear. It's part of their personality. Yeah. They're in a Wild West, they're in a GTA style scenario. And so, we actually have one of the biggest challenges we had when we were early on is, we were working with other LLM providers and they have certain boundaries and it's all designed around largely workplace style productivity. If you think about ChatGPT, it's not a tool that's meant to be used in these sort of recreational settings. And so we have had to design the system and the LLMs and the safety systems to sort of allow for all of those different scenarios. And it's frankly a continuing journey, because then we're learning, okay, where is that line? The orc example is a very real one, right? We need to make sure that you can be hateful towards orcs, but not hateful towards real world groups. And so we've literally trained our safety system to also be able to differentiate between those.
And so with my time with Kylan coming to a close, my thoughts were on what's still to come. After all, Origins was finished for many months prior to its release. Given the rate at which this technology is improving, what's in the pipeline from the company? And does that mean improvements to Origins itself? Or should we expect to see entirely new projects from the company? So there's a lot of work, as you say, Origins has been finished for a while, and then it was a case of just getting it out there in the wild. With a lot of the updates that are happening to the systems and to the APIs as a whole and the respective engines, is that something that we should expect to see in Origins version 2.0, or are you go in the direction of maybe trying a new tech demo to try and push this into a different direction, both creatively as well as technically?
We're starting to think a lot more seriously about first-party experiences that demonstrate new forms of games. Yeah. And the kind of idea behind that is, when we interact with, top-end creative groups, it's actually astounding the new ideas that they come up with. These guys are good. But there's new mechanics, new types of game designs that we want to inspire and have considered as well through conversations. So what I think we're going to start doing a bit more over the next little while is starting to think about first-party content more seriously. Not from the idea of tech demos necessarily, but actually full-fledged experiences and games. So we are internally considering whether or not that means, taking Origins or something like that, expanding that, or trying, build a series of other, experiences. But that is definitely something we're looking at and are also very keen for input on. The greatest groups that we've encountered have been we're not trying to take, Legend of Zelda and make Navi talk. We're trying to take Legend of Zelda and turn the characters into the Water Temple, where your actual interactions with characters is part of the kind of core game mechanism. And demonstrating that market, though, may mean producing some of our own first-party content that really illustrates what's possible.
And so it seems like there's plenty more to come from Inworld in the future. Whether that means more of the Origins demo or entirely new projects, well, we'll just have to wait and see. Naturally, you can bet I'll be keeping my eye on future events as they unfold. But in the meantime, thanks for watching this episode here of AI in Games, and a special thanks to Kylan Gibbs for taking the time to chat with me about all things Inworld. I hope you've all found this interesting. In the meantime, don't forget that the Origins demo is available now on Steam. I'll stick the link in the description, so if you want to try it out yourself, it's but a click and download away. Plus, if you want to try out Inworld's tools yourself, once again, check out the links in the video description and in my pinned comment. See how you can sign up for a free account and start building your own conversational characters and later deploy them into your game engine of choice. Thanks once again to Inworld for sponsoring this video, and I hope you've all found this deep dive into the company's works to be of interest. I'll be back soon with my regular programming, but until then, take care of yourselves, and I'll be back.